From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Chris Murphy. I'm head of the Near East section here in the African and Middle Eastern Division of the Library of Congress. The division is made up of three sections. The African section that focuses on developing the collection from and about sub-Saharan Africa. The Hebraic section that focuses on developing the collection in Hebrew and Yiddish and in Judaica worldwide, and the Near East section, of which I'm the head, which focuses on developing the collection from and about all of the Arab countries, Iran, Afghanistan, former Soviet Central Asia, Western China, and the Muslims in Russia and the Balkans. And to that end, here in the division are the various specialist and reference librarians who can assist any of you with your research questions or collection development questions covering a very broad part of the world, I think some 77 countries. Today, we are having a presentation, and these presentations are part of the division's outreach. Our task and the task throughout the library is quite simply stated. We are to acquire the materials and provide assistance in order to assist the United States Congress in its activities, the federal bureaucracy, and finally the international scholarly public. So it's a rather broad purview that we are given. And part of our task is to make known the collections and the culture of the areas for which we have the responsibility to develop the collections. And that's what today's program and many other programs that we've had are all about. As we usually do, this program will be videotaped, and the Library of Congress receives about 4 billion, yes, billion, hits on its website per year. So we have a very nice audience today, but in fact, our speaker will be speaking to a much, much broader audience. Again, I want to thank you on behalf of the division for being here. I want to extend the apologies of Dr. Mary Jane Deeb, the chief of this division, who is unavoidably away today. And now I would like to ask Dr. Muhammad Salhi, one of the Arab World Specialists, to please come up and introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Our speaker today, Maha Addasi, started her career in radio and television, where she created programs ranging from medical documentaries to cultural magazines. Her program, Heartbeat, addressed issues that helped the underprivileged and underrepresented. Her program, Focus on Arabia, captured the nuances and cultural mosaic of the Middle East. She led the media part of a campaign to raise awareness on issues of sustainability in the deserts of Jordan. The campaign ended with a gala dinner at the Dorchester Hotel in London, and that was attended by heads of states. For the campaign, Maha created advertising spots and a half-hour documentary, Badia, that was shown on various television stations, including the BBC. She turned her attention to writing for children and young adults when she moved to the United States with her young family. Maha has an MFA in writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Maha's books are published by Boyd's Mills Press in Homesdale, Pennsylvania. On a personal note, Maha and I go way back. I won't mention how far back so as not to embarrass her and myself. but suffice it to say that my son is a huge fan of Auntie Maha's books. To the audience, this event is being videotaped for subsequent broadcast on the library's website and other media. The audience is encouraged to offer comments and raise questions during the formal question and answer period. But please be advised that your voice and image may be recorded and later broadcast as part of this event. By participating in the question and answer period, you are consenting to the library's possible reproduction and transmission of your remarks. And now, without further ado, Maha Addasi.
Thank you, Muhammad. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. It's an honor to be here. Okay, let me see. Let me get started. Trying to capture the nuances of a foreign culture is a challenge. Add to that the sensitivities attached to addressing a religion, and writing becomes a tightrope act between conveying a compelling story and keeping the cultural backdrop accurate. To demonstrate the challenges faced in writing about a foreign culture, I opted to take the example of books about the Arab and Islamic world. But lessons from this example can carry over to writing and reading about any culture foreign to the author or reader. So what is it that makes the book about the Arab and Islamic world an accurate one? And why is it that even the most sensitive and best-intentioned authors end up telling stories in a disrespectful way, or unintentionally perpetuating stereotypes about that part of the world? More importantly, how can these mistakes be avoided, and how can a reader spot them in a book? Because there are many misconceptions about the veil in Islam, I want to take a moment to try to remove some of these myths before going on to discuss the books. The idea is to use the specific example of the veil to stand for any sort of cultural or religious appropriation. Anthropologist Fadwa al-Gindi came across a tribe known as the Tuareg when she researched her book, Veil, Modesty, Privacy, and Resistance, Dress, Body, Culture. The Tuareg are a Berber people who are not Arabs. They are mainly nomadic desert dwellers, but who are now settled in Western Africa. What is interesting about the Tuareg is that it is the men who veil and not the women. This is a Tuareg man. El-Gindi said the veil is worn continually by men at home, traveling during the evening or day. To eat, a Tuareg carefully raises the veil enough to enable him to eat, but not far enough for his mouth to be seen, For if he lowers his veil to eat, he reveals a lower standard in society. A noble does not expose his mouth. The veil is a mark of maturity. Only as a youth approaches maturity at about the age of 17 does he wear a veil. Unveiled youth do much of the menial work and the herding. So this is a delinquent Tuareg man. And here's a Tuareg woman. The women don't have to veil. This woman has a scarf draped over her shoulders, and she has a lot of skin showing. You have to remember that this is a Muslim tribe. It's obvious that for the Tuareg, the veiling is a matter of status and prestige. El-Gindi summarizes the veiling of the Tuareg men as being about privacy, identity, kinship, status, rank, and class. Another theme emerges in the study. The veil is a symbol of power. So why is it that the mainstream Western mindset looks at a woman's veil as a reflection of women's invisibility, female subordination, and their oppression, even when the women themselves say that it is an expression of their faith and that they enjoy it? Because it was men who were veiled, people I interviewed fully believed that it was the men's choice to cover up. And this is anecdotal. This is just me talking with friends about this. Why can we not extend this attitude towards women who choose to cover up as well? Why can we not extend it and believe that this is what they want to do in Islamic societies as well as non-Islamic ones? What I'm focusing on is the fact that there's a growing majority of women in Islamic and non-Islamic countries who choose to wear the veil. When writing and reading about another culture, it's very important that you start with a clean slate and leave behind any ingrained ideas about the culture. These ideas may be very inaccurate. Now moving on to the books, which include several versions of the Arabian Nights selected for their historical perspective. Author Rukhsana Khan's Wanting More, a novel selected for its setting Afghanistan, and the inner perspective about face covering rendered in the novel. The Breadwinner, selected because the female Muslim character resorts to dressing up as a boy to survive the Taliban-led Afghan era. With the exception of the Arabian Nights, of course, I contacted the authors of the books I'm discussing or their editors. These books are fabulous books that I highly recommend. I'm merely using the books to illustrate a few points. Shelley Tanaka, editor of The Breadwinner, told me that Ellis has donated over $1 million of her book royalties so far to Street Kids International and to Women for Women, an organization that supports health education projects in Afghanistan. It's evident that Ellis her intent is to draw attention to the plight of Afghan women in order to aid them. This sentiment proves that Ellis's books have the purpose of bringing information to the Western reader with the hope of helping the Afghans overcome their struggles. It is safe to assume that any cultural inaccuracies that appear in Ellis's books are unintentional. So The Breadwinner provides a good example where inaccuracies are considered and author intent is investigated. Historical perspective. It is crucial to identify why stereotypes about the Islamic world exist in children's literature. A historical perspective of books about that part of the world sheds some light. The Arabian Nights, also known as the 1001 Nights, is a good place to start. From an Arab and Islamic perspective, this book could more aptly have been named The 1001 Problems. No author name is attached to the Arabian Nights because the existing books are translations from an old text that dates back to the 800s, and because the Arabian Nights does not have one author. It is in fact a compilation of folk tales and fairy tales that were exchanged orally between peoples of Arabia, Persia, India, and even Greece. The frame story of the Arabian Nights is a fictitious one about a king, Shahriyar, which is Persian for king, who discovers that his wife has been unfaithful to him. He has her executed and decides to teach all women a lesson. Each night he marries a new woman and has her executed by morning. The man assigned to provide the wives is the vizier or minister. The vizier's daughter, Shahrazad, learns of the king's morbid process and asks her father to marry her off to him. She has a plan to divert the calamity that has befallen her people. Much to the vizier's distress, he complies, and Shahrazad, whose name is Persian for commoner, is married off to King Shahriyar. Shahrazad puts her plan to use immediately. The first night, she starts telling the king a story and spends the entire night relating a fantasy. Her story has people and genies caught in compelling situations, and Shahrazad makes sure she does not complete the story she begins. By morning, the king is so intrigued by the story that he does not order his new wife's execution in hopes of finding out the rest. This is repeated indefinitely. The 1000, which in this case means infinity, lends its name to the title. After many stories are related, Shahriyar realizes he loves Shahrazad and pardons her. The tales in the Arabian Nights should be seen as a pastime or diversion. Sadly, the Arabian Nights is considered a reference for the Arab and Islamic cultures, and too many authors and readers take the premise at face value. For instance, let me ask this audience the question. When you hear the words the Arabian Nights, what kind of dancing comes to mind in association with these words? I'd like to see a show of hands. Is it the type of dancing that's performed to lute music, where the musical instrument is the focus? Or is it belly dancing, where the focus is on the dancer and her attire? Yep. This is what a basic Google search brings up for the Arabian Nights. This picture shows Shahrazad in a typical belly dance outfit on the cover of a book with the Arabian Nights title. And here we see the type of entertainment at this restaurant that happens to be called the Arabian Nights. This is the problem with these images. The original text of the Arabian Nights did not have a single reference to a belly dancer. Music is mentioned mostly in the context of musicians such as lute players. Yet the image of belly dancers is forever ingrained in readers' minds. The reason for this is directly related to an existing spiced-up version of the book that became the basis of the Hollywood movie scripts that carry the Arabian Nights name. A British diplomat based in the Middle East in 1885 wrote the culprit book. Sir Richard Burton's version, entitled The 1000 Nights and a Night, included sexual references that Burton made up and added to the book to give it heightened reader appeal. I mean, some things never change, right? To avoid flack for the book that was published in the Victorian era, Burton's books were available only by mail order. Amazing for the Victorian era. Once transferred to the screen, these Burton added details became indelible visual images that further reinforced the concept of female belly dancers as entertainers in the Arab setting. Here's the deal with belly dancing. Belly dancing is to the Arab culture what jogging is to the American culture. It's all about movement, and it's not unique to the Arab world. Referring to that form of dance as belly dance is actually a misnomer, and the term itself came from a costume that was made to reveal the stomach area. The term belly dance was coined in 1893 by American Saul Bloom. Bloom was exposed to theater at a young age. In his early 20s, he traveled to Europe and was fascinated by the dance performed in the Algerian community in France. He commissioned 2 dancers to perform at the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's discovery of the New World. The Columbian Fair was held in Chicago in 1893. One of the dancers was nicknamed by Bloom Little Egypt. She stole the show. Bloom dubbed the dance danse de ventre, that was translated literally to belly dance, and the term stuck. Little Egypt, who was Syrian, was wearing a costume designed by Bloom, an American, that was inspired by the Orientalist art painted by Europeans. These were the same paintings that inspired Burton when he wrote his version of the Arabian Nights. These Orientalist paintings were fantastic interpretations by the artists of the era. The art was meant to depict the imagined life within the harem. The belly dance costume is therefore an example of how art inspires reality and how reality can neatly wedge itself into the mosaic of a culture. Audiences expect to see these outfits, and dancers wear them to meet audience expectations. Incidentally, Bloom raised enough money through theater to fund a successful campaign and became a US congressman at the age of 53. He represented New York from 1925 until he died in 1949. As with belly dancing, the concept of the harem is taken out of context. Slavery was rampant in the Arab Peninsula prior to the advent of Islam. A harem, the term used here for argument's sake, was indeed a place where hundreds of slave women lived together. With the advent of Islam, slavery became forbidden. Islam is known for abolishing things in stages. For instance, when drinking alcohol first became a taboo, Muslims were asked to refrain from drinking before prayer. Drinking alcohol then became completely forbidden. In the same vein, the abolition of slavery was done in stages. Slave women who lived in large quarters were freed upon the bearing of a child of a free man, meaning the child of a man who was not himself a slave. The word harem, after the advent of Islam, came to mean merely quarters for women, and women included the mother and sisters of the ruler or homeowner. When the word harem is mentioned today, readers imagine a huge palace where several belly-dancing concubines and dozens of wives of a single man live. The word harem comes from the root word harama, which in Arabic means to prevent. In this case, it's to prevent inconveniencing women. Women in the era of the Arabian Nights chose segregation in their own quarters and preferred this mode of privacy. Yet the word harem is referenced as a mode of oppression of women in the Arab world. Sadly, the Arabs contribute to the seemingly unbreakable stereotype of belly dancers and harems. The restaurants with the Arabian Nights names are mostly Arab-owned. Few realize that their restaurant name further fuels the fire of perpetuating stereotypes and misleading impressions. Likewise, few incidental readers know that there's more at play in the Arabian Nights than meets the eye. For instance, the concept of the arranged marriage is advocated in all versions of the book. Few people know that a Muslim marriage contract is invalid unless the bride gives her consent to the marriage. To clarify, a Muslim clerk presiding over a marriage must ensure that the choice of the woman to enter into a marriage is hers alone. This goes back to the beginnings of Islam. Women in the Arab Peninsula were oppressed before the advent of the religion, and Islam ensured women's free will and granted them the right to their own choices. Pre-Islamic traditions practiced specifically in the Arab Peninsula date back to the age of Jahiliyyah, literally meaning the age of ignorance, where no laws prevailed. The undertones of the culture in the Arabian Nights are typical Jahiliyyah traditions that were eliminated by Islam. Unfortunately, some of the traditions and customs imposed by families continue to exist in some predominantly Muslim countries, but have no basis in the religion. Individuals have continued to enforce these pre-Islamic customs, which have been erroneously attributed to Islam. And it goes on and on. When these inaccuracies are woven into the tapestry of the fictitious work, they may go unchecked. And the point is that even in fiction, the undertones of the setting and culture should not be misrepresented. The issues have seeped into books for young readers, such as the classic Start's Arabian Nights that targets middle grade students. The theme of the oppressed wife is repeated throughout this book, with the misinformed or ignorant wife doing or saying something that jeopardizes her own life and her husband's. There are also several references to concubines. This set of images has become the standard blueprint of the female Arab character in books for all ages. The relevance here is that the Arabian Nights has influenced poets, authors, and playwrights for many years and continues to do so. This list barely licks the tongue-binding tip of the literary iceberg. The Arabian Nights is also the basis of dozens of movies and hundreds of television series that feed into the collective subconscious of the contemporary audience as an accurate measure of the Arab and Islamic world. So, moving on to the contemporary perspective. And the book, The Breadwinner. The Breadwinner is set in Afghanistan during its oppressive Taliban regime. The main character, Parvana, is an 11-year-old girl who helps her father. Each morning, this once high school history teacher sits on a blanket in the marketplace and reads letters for people. Parvana is covered from head to toe, as is required by the Taliban regime, which also forbids women from leaving their homes without a male relative escort. Ellis starts at a good point, where she's trying to shed light on the situation as it is in Afghanistan in the era in which the book is set. This makes for a good hook for a Western reader, as this is the standard way Westerners see oppression of women in the Eastern world. This opening scene sets up a good lead into the next part of the story, when Parvana's father is imprisoned for having a foreign education. With no male in the house to earn money or to escort the women to market or elsewhere, the family is in a bind. Mrs. Weera, a family friend, hatches the idea of disguising Parvana as a boy, and Parvana becomes the breadwinner for the family. That's the name and the title. Ellis gives a good overview of Parvana's close-knit family that was once well-to-do, but is now cramped in a small house. Ellis continues to capture the nuances of life in Taliban-led Afghanistan, but avoids discussing religion directly, and this became a problem. The cultural accuracy issues and missed opportunities presented themselves in the book because of her avoidance of discussing it directly. The dress code of the women mentioned in the book is not discussed, for instance. The implication is that the chador or burqa is entirely Islamic attire that's required of all women. Also, by zeroing in on the family, Ellis should have included details about Afghanistan as it is under the Taliban and contrasted with pre-Taliban days. The Taliban's version of Islamic law is historically inaccurate and fundamentally deviant from prevailing interpretations of Islamic law and practice, but none of that is mentioned. A story should begin on a day that is different, or should refer to that difference. If the reader sees that Afghan women were lawyers, doctors, businesswomen, and teachers, as they were before change, then it becomes clear how far the Afghan people have fallen under the regime of the book that imposes its oppressive ways on the women of Afghanistan. In this way, Ellis could have portrayed the full picture of backwardness to the Western reader, yet acknowledged that things were not always this way for Afghanistan. Western readers need to read the voice of Afghan disapproval of the new realities in Afghanistan through the story, not through Ellis, but through comparisons by the characters themselves. This withholding of information extends beyond handling women's issues. Ellis, for instance, mentions Parvana's family as previously wealthy, but what about the country as a whole? We hear nothing about the houses and buildings except that they are in ruins. Ellis could easily have added a small detail about how the original design of Afghanistan was perhaps rendered by Alexander the Great, which was an interesting fact about that part of the world. Parvana's father is a historian, and it would have been a brilliant move by the author had she added that the buildings were grand structures of architecture that people traveled from all over the world to see. Historically, Afghanistan was part of an ancient trade route that lent the country great economic stature. Here are some scenes from Afghanistan that we never see. The Arab world, comprising 17 countries, accounts for only 20% of the world's Muslim population. The largest Muslim country is Indonesia, which is not an Arab country. It is ironic that the veiling of women is what triggered the unveiling of the study of Islamic culture. Practicing Muslim women around the world cover their hair in various ways. It is an obvious form of dress and therefore difficult to ignore about the Muslim part of the world. Various rumors abound about whether or not women should cover their faces. Many go as far as saying that women who cover their hair are oppressed. Able Muslims are required to perform the Hajj pilgrimage to Islam's holiest city of Mecca at least once in their lifetime. Men must wear 2 unstitched garments to cover their body, whereas women wear their usual long-sleeved clothes, but their skirts must be loose-fitting and reach to the floor. Women must cover their hair, but there is one very important distinction. Women are forbidden from covering their faces in Hajj. So women who cover their faces by the customs of their country are not allowed to cover their faces during the pilgrimage, under any circumstances. The veil is considered a uniform for women so that they're rendered equal. Women with covered hair do not stand out as their beauty is subdued. This is the entire goal of hijab. It neutralizes superficial qualities. The hair is considered to be a beauty asset and can attract the attention of others. Covering the hair nullifies this effect. Hair covering has basis in all the world's religions. Most people cover their heads in places of worship. Muslim women are allowed to pray in any clean spot in the world, making the entire world a place of worship, so covering the hair becomes essential for them everywhere. In Wanting More, Khan handles the face covering directly, and the resolution of the book is possible only because the main character covers her face. Jamila, whose name translates to beauty, is no beauty. She has an unrepaired cleft palate and hides her face under a Chador burqa because it's the custom of her village. When her stepbrother, Masoud, who comes from a village with different customs, sees Jamila's split lip, he assumes her condition is why she chooses to cover her face. No wonder you hide yourself. That's not why I cover. I would cover myself even if I was the most beautiful girl in the world, especially if I was beautiful. Later, when her lip is surgically repaired, Jamila has the urge to show her new face. She's in the girls' section of an orphanage, and uncovering her face among her peers is within the cultural norms. For a little while, this is exactly what Jamila does. I'm fingering my parani, which is a scarf. I should cover up my face, but for the first time, I really don't want to. Is it so bad to want others to see my new face? Is it like bragging? Jamila struggles with her decision to leave her face uncovered and remembers her own words to her stepbrother. After having lunch in the girls' cafeteria with her face uncovered, she gets compliments from friends about her looks. Yet Jamila still feels guilty about this lapse in covering herself. That night, I crawl into my bed and turn my back to them, and for the first time since she died, I dream of Moore, her recently deceased mother. She turns her head away, and I see then that I'm not wearing anything at all. People are walking by, not even noticing that I'm standing there without anything on. I want to hide, but I can't leave her. Khan discusses the face covering as a choice made by Jamila and not as something imposed by others. This is why her book successfully shows a side of the Afghan dress code without perpetuating stereotypes. Khan's facts are accurate and informative. When Jamila decides to cover her face, we learn the reasoning behind it. Kala Karima gave me a gift of a new chadri, which is another name for a burqa. It's the light blue cotton kind with the mesh screen across the eyes. It leaves my hands free to carry things underneath. I could dress like Soraya, just with loose clothes and a Parani scarf, tied properly to cover my hair. Nothing wrong with that, but this is the way the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, dressed, and this is the way more would have dressed. They were so strong, they were able to control their vanity. I want to be like them. Emulating the Prophet's wives is considered by Muslims to be a way to show a deepening commitment to the faith. Khan's book works because her story is more grounded in the culture and therefore more authentic and resonant. Writers of Islamic and Arab cultures are either from within the cultures or are outsiders. The reader picks up on the sentiments of the author and can form biased opinions. Every incident that even skirts the issue of religion should be tackled from all the angles so that the reader can get a comprehensive view. Issues also come up when books do not have Islamic faith as its central theme. In The Breadwinner, such a situation arises where a native author would have been able to show how the Taliban are going against the faith they claim to uphold. In one incident, a Taliban walks up to Parvana on her blanket dressed as a boy and asks her to read a letter for him. "You're a letter reader, read this." A native author would develop this scene further. The first word revealed in the Quran is read. It is an order that Muslims feel reverberates through the ages, stressing the importance of education and reading for all. Men and women alike were educated from the early times of Islam. Preventing women from getting an education is another Jahiliyyah concept. Women in Islam owned and ran their own businesses in the days of the Prophet. They were successful educators and were even consulted in military matters. Yet here is a Taliban man who's trying to enforce his own version of Islam, and he cannot even read. The Breadwinner is not a book about religion, again, but Ellis's setting is so intertwined with religion that even when she avoids discussing it, she's writing about it still. She writes about the religion in the spaces between the lines. What she leaves out imparts more of a negative impact than what she includes. Ellis falls into another cultural trap without even realizing it, as is evident in the following example. Nuria started to heat water for tea on the little gas stove in the bathroom. If Ellis said the house was so small that the family had to compromise certain values, it would have passed as an attempt by the author to explain the family's compromises. Afghans, who are mostly Muslim, consider bringing food into a bathroom a taboo. Muslims consider it disrespectful to do so, as it is not the way to show thanks for the gift of food. Ellis could have said that the family members risked being flogged by the Taliban, but snuck the cook stove outside to cook their meals in the dead of night. This is a situation where a collaborator reader would have vetted this inaccuracy, and here these questions would have been addressed. Even though I consider myself part of the Arab culture, I fell into vetting issues myself. Being from the culture does not make one immune to the pitfalls of writing about it. Until 1 month before publication, this book had the name Candy, O Candy, which are words from the song the children chanted during the Candy Festival that the book is about. My editor wanted the word Ramadan in the title. So I had to find a name for this Candy Festival that takes place in the middle of the month of Ramadan. The name simply didn't exist. But in my research, I found out that the 3 days that fall in the middle of every month in the Islamic calendar are called the 3 Whites. The Candy Festival happened to take place during those 3 days. The problem was that the Candy Festival took place after dark, and the 3 Whites referred to the days. So I asked a Muslim scholar and an imam for permission to vary the words. I got permission, but I had to have the young character in the book say the words herself, so that the name appeared to be her idea. My first readers were pleased, and it worked. The changes appeared in italics in the final version of the book and added a new layer to the meaning of the festival. Things got trickier with my second book, Time to Pray, which is about a little girl who learns about the 5 prayers that observant Muslims perform each day. Before Muslims pray, they perform a special washing ritual or ablution. There's a special order for this. First, the right hand, then the left, and so on. I had the correct order, but at one point, I mentioned that the grandmother washed her ears instead of wiped her ears. The conversation with my first reader went like this. You said washed instead of wiped her ears. Is that a problem? I said. I can change it. It's not a big deal, is it? Let me put it this way. If you keep the word washed, you will, in essence, be changing the religion. You will spread misinformation to young readers about ablution. Mind you, the book is nothing to do with ablution. It is a true violation because it's like you are purposely misleading young minds. So I was like the Salman Rushdie of picture books suddenly because of this one word. There are often allowances for honest mistakes, but there's not much leeway when it comes to core religious matters. In this case, subsequent readers vetting for inaccuracies were in agreement with the first reader, surprisingly. Now onto the global perspective. And sadly, there are hundreds of misconceptions that need to be cleared up about the Arab and Muslim world worldwide. This became more evident after 9/11, of course. It's not just the Western perspective that needs to be addressed, but the perspective of those who claim to be from Islamic countries that have veered clear of the original message of Islam. No one book will be able to fix all the misconceptions, but authors have to write responsibly and to read with an open heart and mind so they do not add to the misinformation when they discuss books with others. This does not mean that an author has to be from within a culture to write about it. All the books I mentioned are excellent books to read, but as readers, please don't stop at reading only one book. That's the one recommendation I ask of you. If you are interested in a certain culture, read 3, 4 different books, and you'll get a more three-dimensional perspective. When tackling books for young readers that deal with a foreign culture as the main theme, writers and readers can follow some guidelines so that no distortions occur. The importance of accuracy take on a new dimension, often under the radar of the most well-intentioned person. One can assume that every one of the world's religions is based on being good to humanity. People uphold this whether they belong to an organized religion or not. If anyone says or does anything that jeopardizes humanity, they have relinquished their membership in the religion. A story should be written and read beginning with a clean, clear slate with no preconceived notions and stereotypes. No unsupported assumptions should be made. The spark of a story idea may come from a newspaper article, but the article should not be the only research reference on which to depend for information, whether as a reader or as a writer. If you have questions about the culture you're reading about, ask 2 people native to the culture for specific details. It's important to understand why native readers may have had issues with some of the details. The reasons behind the changes may affect other aspects of the story, and in turn, your impressions about the culture. It's important to note that even books out in the world that have been vetted by native readers may have errors. This is why an author is fully responsible for any mistakes that appear in the text. Many acknowledgments grant thanks to the astuteness of a first reader, but this is often followed by the declaration that any mistakes that appear in this work are the author's alone. As a reader, you need to address the doubts you may have about a story. A writer and reader must be clear on the difference between forgivable and unforgivable mistakes. When choosing to keep a forgivable mistake, the writer must ensure that it is because of story. This means that if a character is cooking in the bathroom, we need to know why. As a reader, you need to ask yourself whether or not the unusual oddities in the book are for the sake of story or cultural anomalies. The point of view of the book is important. If it's told from a first-person perspective and it's the character's unique experience, you have to figure that out. Is the message kept in the perspective of the character as opposed to the book being a vehicle for conveying the author's own stereotyped views of the culture? Ask yourself that. Readers can tell if the author has an agenda. Look for the signs. A book should remain true to the voice of the story without being heavy-handed or didactic. Didactic books have an obvious agenda. As an author, I realize that not all sources are created equal. If a translated work is used as a source, it too must be checked and vetted for cultural accuracy. Being from the culture did not make me immune to the pitfalls. It's important to acknowledge that within a culture, there's a variation in the adherence level of its members to the traditions, faiths, and subcultures within it. Books where characters portray these differences are important. When characters are not carbon copies of each other, the books help to prevent perpetuation of stereotypes. As a reader, look for the differences. Last but not least, it's important to remember that what you may have read in the Arabian Nights stays in the Arabian Nights. Thank you.
Can we have time for some questions and answers?
Yes. The thing is, the important thing is not to form an impression just reading one book. That's the more important thing. I mean, I was very entertained by reading all the versions that I did get to read of the Arabian Nights. Each one was fascinating in a different way. But because I knew that it wasn't something that I should base all my research on, I was upfront about wanting to read other books as well. But you know, it's like, there's a reason for wanting to know whether this book is accurate or not. For me, the reason was research for my other books. But for you as a reader, if it's entertaining enough, that's fine, as long as it's not creating in your mind a cultural image that is indelible. So, you know, books are read for different reasons, entertainment and other. Okay. I think the question was something about nonfiction and fiction being accurate. I think also that nonfiction has more of a demand for needing to be accurate. Even fictitious works have to be designed in a setting that has all the cultural nuances right down pat. So nonfiction is definitely, I mean, absolutely necessary. There was a book that was withdrawn from Fairfax County for inaccuracies. That was a nonfiction taught in history classes. So, I mean, it's definitely, you know. Did everyone hear that? It's amazing how many books are out there. I mean, when I started my search, I found like 40, 50 books just like from a single search. And they're not obviously created equal, but each one is good at building that image in its own way. So if you bring them all together, then you have various images and they come together well. The interesting thing is that like there are more schools for belly dancing in the United States than there are in the Arab world. You know, just like the concept, the concept of the harem and the concept of belly dance is just amazing how things are different in different cultures and perspectives. Yes?
I'm glad to see this work because stereotypes are human nature. And I think we just have to work all the
Sure, I can give you my card and you can email me and I can give you a list of books that I would recommend. Anytime you have more than 2 people in a room, you're prone to get some kind of stereotyping. Anytime, you know, even if you're just one person and then you're thinking about, it's so easy to fall into that trap. So, yeah.
Can you give us some examples of some of the challenges you found yourself in your work to address some of these challenges?
Well, to get some aspects of story, like for me, the title, just finding the sources to get a name that accurately gives the meaning for the White Nights of Ramadan. It took me forever to find those books, and I needed those books in the native Arabic. Just the concept of referencing items, things that I find useful for my story, are not documented as such. So I had to go find several sources and fit them together. And a lot of my research depended on personal experiences, whether mine or someone I knew who had these experiences, and I had to interview them. So actually documenting it in a bibliography was very difficult. It was always based on interviews or speaking with an imam or a scholar, because you really have to be careful. And you can't make things up. I mean, one slip, one word, you're gone, you know. So, yeah. Yes?
I was just going to make a comment. One, I think the Arabic book that you pointed out with the bathroom and food, I think that is quite serious. Definitely, especially to a Muslim. So I think we have to be very careful, even in fiction books as well as nonfiction, that they are accurate, whether or not you're going to add some folklore, but that the actual depiction of the people and culture is accurate. The other thing is, I think a lot of our misconceptions are coming from tourists in the West, documenting things and adding to it, embellishing it, everything from the dances of the baladi, somehow or another became belly dancing and actually have very little to do with the actual belly. But not only that, the costumes that are being worn here in the States, as well as in Europe, we would have never seen anything like this. Bras and bellies hanging out, and even to show legs in many cases when you're on stage or dancing is very unsettling. So we have to be very careful about what we're seeing and the perception that the West is giving us. The other thing is when we speak about, when we show the Middle East, I think it's very, very important that we show that not everybody looks like what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm bringing that up is because when you look at the Gulf states, when you look at people in Kuwait, Oman, these are all Arab countries, yet they're people that look just like me. And I very rarely see any depictions of people that look like me, yet we're there and we're there in numbers. So I think we have to be very, very, very careful. Even, the first call to prayer was Bilal, and he clearly looked
Bilal,
like me.
absolutely.
So we have to be very careful with that as well when we talk about stereotypes and misconceptions in our book. I would like to see more people that look like me because we are there as well.
There is a distinction when doing books like picture books. You have a script and you send it off into the office of your publisher, and then you relinquish all ties to it. It's like sending your baby out into the world. You don't see the illustrator, you don't see the illustrations. I was very fortunate that my publisher did let me see the galleys, he did let me see the illustrations because of cultural accuracy issues. But my say in these comments were just to make sure that there was nothing in the stance of the person praying that was wrong or offensive. I cannot say anything about, I don't like how the grandmother looks, or I don't like, or I want this person conveyed this way. I have no say in that. And that's how they like it. They want the artist to be independent and able to express him or herself. There will be more, I'm sure there are more changes coming. And I know, because of the age of the internet, less embellishment by people traveling is possible now. I mean, this is the age now where things are going to be far more accurate than ever before. And people check and go to their sources and find things out. The bathroom scene in The Breadwinner is one of the mildest scenes. There's another horrific scene in the book. If you ever read it and you want to email me, we can talk about it, that I also addressed in a different paper. You know, this is one of the simpler things that, you know, I chose to mention today. And that's why I consider it a forgivable type of error. You know, it's just something that is perhaps part of the story. It can be passed along as part of a story, so others aren't so excusable, I think. So. Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We
Thank
have
you
a
all.
Book signing afterwards for anybody interested in buying the book. Well, thank you. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me this.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.